Chapter 14 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 14. Victor Abducted and Imprisoned. The bloody conspirators worked hard and faithfully to influence their people, besides throwing baits and firebrands amongst those who were in less reputable pursuits, such as rum, tobacco, perfumery dealers, and patent medicine vendors, showing plainly that if Victor Juno's teachings were accepted by the people, there would be an end to orthodox creeds, and medical doctors, medicines, rum, tobacco, toilet articles, and the 1,001 fashionable make-ups and unnecessary artificial paraphernalia would be useless, and the manufacture and sale of these articles would totally cease. Therefore, the thousands of people who make a good livelihood at these trades would lose the means of making a living through such doctrines as Victor Juno advocated. This kind of logic was convincing to those who cannot see God in natural things, but who are born, bred, and educated under artificial logic, artificial habits, and as Victor Juno says, they live by art, doctor by art, and expect to fly to glory on golden wings. The bloody conspirators are not idiots nor simpletons, but deep, cunning villains, who understand all about the power of God's holy laws, and whilst they are not able to teach sound doctrines, they can nevertheless comprehend what such doctrines imply when presented to their senses by the true naturalist. Therefore they are envious and jealous beyond endurance of the man who dare present sounder and holier teachings than have been advocated and followed by themselves. Here then is a bugbear that must be removed at all hazards, and, as the followers of the sectarian creeds are not so wide awake and apt to comprehend good and evil as the bloody conspirators, the latter find it no trouble at all to control and wheedle these sincere and innocent followers of the believers. Hence, in one short week, these 4 bloody conspirators, Reverend Joe Pier, Deacon Rob Stew, Sister Nancy Clover, and Dr. Toy Pancy, have the whole religious community in a blaze of earnest zeal for the rescue of sinners from the infidel and heretical teachings of this vile innovator, who thinks nothing of preaching his profligate doctrines in a playhouse on the holy Sabbath day, there to urge on the masses of worldlings to violate the holy Lord's day by running the streetcars on the Sabbath. The following Sunday the great majority of ministers preached special sermons on this man Juno, denouncing him in the most severe terms that it was possible for them to utter and seem saintly. They urged their people to use every means to destroy the influence of this sacrilegious innovator, and also requested their Sabbath school teachers to command and exhort their pupils not to go where Victor Juno was, nor to dare to read or touch any of his books or advertisements. Any reasonable free thinker, who does his own thinking, may at a glance behold the power that these bloody conspirators were wielding. But this was only a drop in Victor Juno's cup, and truly thus, bad begins, but worse remains behind. Deacon Rob Stew failing to impress General Washington Armington favorably, when he had a secret interview in the general's library with him, and having it from the general's own lips that he should stand by Mr. Juno until he saw improper acts on the part of Victor Juno, caused the bloody conspirators to abduct both him and Miss Armington, and announce to the general that Victor Juno had eloped with his faithful daughter Lucinda. They telegraphed to Pittsburgh and later to Chicago, to their sectarian equals, to send telegrams back stating that a Mr. Juno and the handsome daughter of General Washington Armington were seen in those places, thus having bona fide proofs to present to the general's own eyes that his daughter was seduced and carried away by this ruthless person. When the general received this sad news, he was almost paralyzed with amazement. but Pat O'Connor and Judy McCrea, who had been faithful servants for long years, whispered earnest comfort into the general's ears, and even exposed some tangible deviltry of some of the pious clique. However, Pat was too wise and cunning to open his secrets too far to anyone, because he had unbounded confidence in Victor Juno, Miss Lucinda Armington, and a just God; therefore felt certain that everything would turn out right in the end. The general was between two fires, as he was inclined to believe the bloody conspirators. In fact, they gave him convincing proof; but, on the other hand, he had too much faith in his beautiful and affectionate daughter to believe that she would play so wickedly; and he also believed what Pat O'Connor and Judy McCrea whispered to him. At any rate, he was persuading himself that his fair daughter was not the girl that the saints made her appear, and he made up his mind to remain unprejudiced, but wait and watch. He set himself to work to learn when Victor Juno left his own house, and, by applying to Mr. Juno's civil male servant, the latter told him that his master was last seen going down Chestnut Street about 11 o'clock in the evening of last Thursday. On that very Thursday night Miss Armington also disappeared, so, according to this statement, they left or were disposed of at the same time. Victor Juno was not a suspicious man, but rather believed that people were more honest than their actions proved; and, on account of his immense benevolence, he very readily trusted those whom he should have shunned, and by so doing he was very easily led into a perfect trap. As he turned the corner of Fourth and Chestnut Streets, he spied a gentlemanly-looking man coming straight toward him, who bowed profoundly, and said, "You are Dr. Victor Juno, are you not?" "Yes, sir, that is my name," responded Dr. Juno. Hereafter we shall preface Dr. Juno's name with Doctor. "Mr. William T. Josephs, of Kingsessing, sent me in great haste to bring you to his residence. His daughter is very ill, and he desires your services," exclaimed the stranger. "I should be happy to go, but how shall we go? At present my carriage is not home," said Dr. Juno. "Mr. Joseph's close carriage is waiting at a friend's in Walnut Street. I am to bring a male servant with me also, and whilst he was packing up his duds, I proposed to go direct to your office and ask you to get ready to go, and I thought by the time the driver got around to your office you might be ready to jump in, and thus we should not lose any time," interposed the stranger. "Certainly," said Dr. Juno. "But, doctor, as I have found you here, if you have the kindness, you would better accompany me down to Walnut Street, where we can get into the carriage and stop at your office on our way out there, if you choose to stop there," interposed the stranger. "I will do so, nor is it necessary for me to stop at my office, but we had better hurry to Mr. Joseph's, if his daughter is so sick," said Dr. Juno. "Thank you, sir. Here comes the carriage already," responded the stranger. The gentlemanly man, whose face was somewhat familiar to Dr. Juno, motioned to the driver to drive to the curb, which was in a rather illy lit part of the street. The driver jumped from his box, opened the carriage door, when the male servant stepped out and Dr. Juno was politely invited to step in, the stranger and pretended servant following, the driver closed the door, and off rolled the vehicle. All were silent, but in a few moments Dr. Juno felt some strange sensations, and looking around the carriage saw what seemed to be a bundle of clothes, which he thought was the servant's wardrobe, when suddenly, as they turned a dark corner, he was vigorously grasped and gagged, and bound hand and foot, so that he was entirely powerless. The carriage was rattled along speedily, turning an innumerable quantity of corners, until, after driving for what seemed an age to Dr. Juno, it ceased to rattle, having struck a country road, and after continuing straight ahead for what seemed a long time, a few turns were made, when the team was stopped, and in great darkness he was roughly seized by 4 men, and carried into a damp apartment, and dumped on a hard cemented floor, when a voice said, "Have you got him safe and sound?" "All right," responded another brutal voice. Then they all departed, and the last that Dr. Juno heard of them that night was the rattling of several immense keys as they locked the doors. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of the Social War of 1900, or the Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Social War of 1900, or the Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 15. Reported Elopement and Seduction of Lucinda by Victor. Sister Nancy Clover had been spreading secretly amongst her circle of saints the delightful gossiping news that Miss Lucinda Armington was not what she ought to be, having been too intimate with this roux, Victor Juno; and, of course, since both Dr. Victor Juno and Miss Lucinda Armington disappeared at the same time, the entire community believed that an elopement was certain. A great deal of sympathy was felt and expressed for General Washington Armington, and whilst many saints innately rejoiced at the calamity that had befallen the general, they nevertheless were free with their expressions of pity for the poor misled daughter, whilst they denounced to General Armington's face this profligate son of toil, whose outgrowth was plainly to be seen in this ungrateful act to his benefactor and intended father-in-law. The general would not allow anyone to say anything cruel of his daughter or Dr. Juno, because he believed them innocent of crime. He soliloquized thus: "Why should my faithful and loving daughter elope with Victor Juno, or why should he desire to do so, as long as I encouraged their union?" Whilst the general was thus in deep meditation, Deacon Rob Stew was ushered into the library of the former, where the general sat with downcast countenance. "Good morning," cheerfully said Deacon Stew. "Good morning," coldly replied the general. "My dear brother, do not take this elopement so seriously to heart, for I have rather good news for you." "What is it?" interposed the general, impatiently. "Why, sir, I have just received a letter from New York, from a faithful brother, who says that he saw a lady and gentleman answering to the description of Miss Lucinda and Dr. Juno take passage on a vessel for Liverpool last week," responded Deacon Rob Stew. "Indeed, sir, I don't believe it," said the unsuspicious general. "Don't believe it? What reason have you to doubt it? Surely they have eloped." "Silence, Deacon Stew!" furiously and frantically ejaculated the general, and continued: "I believe that there is some foul plot at work to remove these innocent young people from my presence. They were not opposed by me in their desire to become man and wife. Then why should they elope, I want to know?" "General, you confound my ideas, but if you had not lost patience with me, I think I could set your mind at ease on this subject," said Deacon Stew, tremblingly and much frightened. "Well, sir, I am all patience. Speak," replied the general. "Pardon me when I say that I am confident that Miss Armington was pure, but Dr. Juno did not desire marriage with your daughter. He had other designs upon the lovely and unsuspecting daughter of your house, and this is the reason that he eloped with her, very likely promising marriage," said the deacon. "Oh, horrible, horrible!" exclaimed the general. "Dear brother, please be consoled, and trust in the Lord," solemnly said the bloody deacon. "Oh, deacon, I have never dreamt of what you just insinuated, but I now feel that my poor child has fallen into the hands of a monster," exclaimed the general, with great tears in his eyes. "If you desire it, dear brother, I will do my utmost to arrest this demon, or probably it would be as well for us to telegraph to Liverpool and request the authorities there to arrest him when he arrives," said the deacon. "No, good brother, I think I had better at once get ready and follow these truant children. I will take 2 good male servants with me, and start for Liverpool to morrow,
for I have no heart to live here whilst disgrace and ruination, yes, and probably desertion, may befall my dear child. Oh, daughter, daughter, what have you done? I have centred my whole life, soul, and spirit on you, and for you to be thus snatched from me is more than an old man can endure. God, oh God, aid and comfort my bleeding heart," exclaimed the heart-broken general. The deacon was internally spoiling with delight to think that his plans had worked so very excellently, and thought he, "When Sister Nancy Clover learns the real state of things, she will fairly glut over the success of our plot, and be doubly delighted at the distress of the general, and discomfiture of his hateful daughter. She will seek the general, and offer her saintliest sympathy and most energetic assistance. But when the general is gone to Europe, we shall have a clear track before us. Truly, won't I go to the proud, stuck-up, and apostate Miss Lucinda Armington's prison, and dictate my own terms of peace. Ha, ha, my caged bird, I'll save you the trouble of disguising yourself again for the purpose of acting the aunt, to spoil our holy plans. And as for the heroic and celebrated Dr. Juno, he shall feed on slim victuals, whilst a lingering death shall be his most certain portion this time. Yea, verily, and I shall let him know that it was I, Deacon Rob Stew, of the Orthodox faith, who instigated and managed his ruin for molesting the elect in our God-ordained work of Christianity." The deacon now repaired to headquarters of the bloody conspirators, to inform them of the state of General Armington's mind, whilst the general was at work making preparations to leave for Liverpool. He called Pat O'Connor and Judy McCrea to his side, and told him that he was going to Europe to seek his daughter, and as they had always been faithful servants, he should give everything into their charge, and he hoped and felt confident that they would prove faithful to him in his hour of sore distress. Here Pat could not hold his peace any longer, and, interrupting the general, said, "Fath, me good mashter, and may me sowl rot if I don't be true to ye, and what's morer, I'll sake for Mistress Lucinda meself, and for good young Mr. Juno." "Pat, never mention the name of that villain, Juno, again, if you do not want to insult me," in great agitation responded the general. "Holy Saint Patrick, but me mashter is desaved by that old divil, Dacon Stew," meditated Pat, and said aloud, "Och, good mashter, your old servant meant no harm when I shpoke of Mr. Pardon me, I didn't mane to spake that name again, but I'll do as ye plaze, and Judy will hilp me, won't ye, Judy?" said Pat. "And sure I will, wid all me heart," responded Judy. Pat and Judy now saw that the deepest kind of villainy was at work, and he said to Judy, "Judy, darlin', I sees, by me soul, that these dirty vagabonds have hided away Miss Armington and Dr. Juno, and may I sace to be an Irishman if I don't blarney them till I diskiver all their diviltry and find me swate mistress." "Och, Pat, and I pray Sant Patrick that ye may not fail to do it, and I'll help ye do it if I die," earnestly said Judy McCrea. The general left the next day, amid the sympathies of the many who bade him adieu and Godspeed; but he did not seem to care or notice anything, except his anxiety to get off as speedily as possible. No sooner had he departed until Deacon Rob Stew went to General Armington's residence, to pump Pat O'Connor and Judy McCrea, for the purpose of ascertaining if they knew or even suspected anything of the abduction of these young lovers. He said to Pat, "Good Pat, your master is now gone to Europe on a great mission of mercy to his poor child, and he told me to look after things whilst he is away. Of course, you are to have charge of everything." "So I taught," interposed Pat, a little surly. "But you must know that the general was in such a distressed state of mind that he did not realize the responsibility you had resting on your shoulders in his and his daughter's absence," gently and sympathetically responded the deacon. "Sure, your honour, ye are right, and I'd be a miserable divil not to belave ye had the good of us at heart," humbly said Pat. "Where is Judy, and what does she think of this elopement?" exclaimed the deacon. "What should she tink of it, yer honor, but that Mr. Juno be's a dirty blackguard," impatiently and indignantly said Pat. But, thought he, "If only Judy will not come here now, because this old curmudgeon might smuggle some wrong ideas out of her innocence." At that moment Judy McCrea was heard in another part of the house, screaming murder at the top of her voice. Chapter 16 of the Social War of 1900, or the Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Social War of 1900, or the Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 16. Lucinda's Thrilling Prayer and Lamentations in Prison. On the night that Miss Lucinda Armington was abducted from the lawn of her father, there were great preparations being made at a celebrated insane asylum near West Philadelphia for the reception of two dangerous and incurable lunatics. For one of these insane persons an underground dungeon was being rapidly finished, because the physician-in-chief at the asylum was informed that this patient could not bear the light of the sun and constellations without disturbing the peace of his own and other people's minds. Darkness, total darkness, and perfect solitude were the only panaceas to quiet his nerves and cause a serene state of human conscience. Moreover, the sound of human voice proved an injury to this most peculiarly affected lunatic. Therefore an immensely thick wall and correspondingly heavy laded doors were constructed for such patients, which was a necessity only of very recent occurrence. In another portion of this same pious and generous Orthodox insane asylum, on the 3rd floor, was prepared an extra private, strong, but comfortable cell for a patient who could not endure human sounds, but was benefited by light and comfort. This cell was not accessible by anyone except the highest officials and Deacon Rob Stew. The latter was the most powerful man in the entire community of the elect saints. The physician-in-chief of this humanitarian asylum was a faithful brother of the faith, who fully confided in the little secret prayers and holy plans of the bloody conspirators, and all his assistants and servants, excepting one Irishman, were equally faithful. For convenience' sake, we will call this unfaithful to the faithful Jemmy, who was a man of strong sympathies for the fallen, depraved, and miserable, and whose honesty had no flaw in its composition. Jemmy was the most trustworthy servant in the asylum, and the physician-in-chief invariably commanded Jemmy to watch the other keepers and the help, making him a kind of superintendent or overseer amongst the many employees, and therefore the latter dreaded Jemmy, because whatever report of delinquency and disobedience he would make to the head of the place would be accepted as truth, from which no appeal would benefit aught. We might here state that Jemmy was a bosom friend of Pat O'Connor, and a distant relative of Judy McCrea, who frequently visited Pat and Judy at General Washington Armington's residence. Therefore he had often seen Miss Lucinda Armington, and Pat on several occasions pointed out Dr. Victor Juno to Jemmy as being the accepted lover of Miss Lucinda Armington. Jemmy believed that their asylum was a model humanitarian institution, whose physician-in-chief, and the managers thereof, were the best men living, and, although he was a Roman Catholic, he believed that his employers were as near saints as Protestants could be. On numerous occasions he told Pat O'Connor that these gentlemen were very pious, being also continually devoted to acts of charity, and besides prayed and worshipped God zealously, which he, Jemmy, esteemed the highest attributes of Christianity, even if they were not Catholics. Pat, however, had less faith in such men, after he became acquainted with Deacon Rob Stew, who was the president of the insane asylum. Nearly all the leading orthodox religionists, except the Roman Catholics, had an interest in this philanthropic asylum for the insane, and no doubt nearly all of them esteemed it a most Christian and exemplary institution. They had formed themselves into a guardianship; hence were privileged members of the asylum to visit every portion of it, except those few departments where incurable lunatics were confined, whose idiosyncrasies were of that peculiar character that human voices, etc., could not be endured by them. To these departments no one had access except the physician in chief, a few of the bloody conspirators, and the servants. Few of the latter were even permitted to enter upon these sacred parts of the asylum. The cells of these departments were seldom cleaned by anyone except the prisoners themselves, who, by a confidential announcement, we may say, were never too crazy or ill, from the onset of their incarceration, to do their own work; and these lunatics were fed through a peculiarly contrived apparatus, which prevented the waiter or keeper from seeing the patient. The basement cells were complete dungeons, where total darkness prevailed; but the third-story cells of these departments were supplied with a good degree of light. However, shutters were so constructed to the windows that total darkness could be produced in a moment, which seemed often necessary when peculiar examinations of patients were required. Many of the patients who were confined in these sacredly secret cells were females, who would not submit to certain tutorage on open terra firma, and who could be more thoroughly managed, subdued, and cured by total darkness, shielding the disciplinarian from unpleasant recognition, than by permitting the light of heaven to cooperate in the consummating of the holy work. It was seldom necessary to introduce instruments of torment into this department of the asylum; but solemnized religious worship, prayer, exhortation, and singing by the saints, was frequently introduced with signal success. It was almost beyond the conception of mortals how peculiarly zealous some of these bloody conspirators were in the work of subjugating those whom they loved with a wicked hatred. The female cells also had several secret doors to them, which were an auxiliary to the work of restoring sanity to the heads and hearts of the fair sex, who were victims to these sacred apartments of the elect. Miss Lucinda Armington first opened her eyes to consciousness, after appearing in her father's lawn on the night of her abduction, in one of these female cells, on the 3rd floor of this insane asylum. She could not imagine where she was, and for what purpose she would be in this unpleasant place. She rose from her neat little couch, and surveyed the tidy little apartment, which was neatly and very comfortably furnished, but withal there was an air of horror connected with the appearance of things. She examined the door, which she found was locked. Next she examined the floor and walls, but found them solid and sound; and as to the window, she could not examine it, because it was a skylight, situated directly overhead, and although there was a table, chair, and bed in the room, she piled them upon each other and managed to climb on top of them, but she was then a few feet too short to reach to the skylight. She replaced her furniture, and began to pound on the door, floor, and walls, but all sounded dead and dull, without the least response from anyone. Next she screamed at the top of her voice, but to no effect, when she thought, "Oh, great heaven! Why am I thus confined in this living tomb? Can this be a prison? But why should I be confined in it? Where was I to my last recollection? Let me think. Oh yes, I remember, Pat O'Connor, Judy McCrea, and myself sat in our dining room, conversing over the outrage that had happened to dear Victor at the theatre; and I now remember of having gone out into the lawn, when suddenly something nasty was thrown over my head, whilst at the same moment some strong hands grasped my body, and I knew nothing more. Surely I was then carried to this prison.
Oh, horror! horror! What may, what will become of me? Great powers of glory protect me, and deliver me from my bondage! Who could have been so cruel as to abduct and incarcerate me thus? Great Lord, an idea flashes through my half-frenzied brain. It was the same bloody conspirators who tried to poison my beloved Victor that have sent me to this place. But what will they do with me? This is horrible, most horrible! Because any one who is bad enough to have me thus abducted and imprisoned is also vile enough to abuse me and murder me, if that suits his pleasure and plans best. What, really, have I done to merit such foul treatment? Let me think. I have always been kind to every one. I have no enemies that I know of. But now it flashes upon my distressed soul, I have stood by the side of dear Victor. I have conspired with Pat and Judy to save my beloved. Oh, darling Victor, save me now from the impending danger that awaits your unprotected Lucinda. My persecutors are monsters, or they would not tear me away from my dear old father, and from my dearly beloved Victor. God, if thou ever hearest the prayers of mortals, hear mine. Infinite and all-powerful Creator, I invoke thee, and all thy vitalizing influences, to stultify and deaden the head and hand that has brought me to this cruel place. I pray thee, Heavenly Father, to shield the just and faithful, whilst thou wilt confound the wicked conspirators who have sought to ruin and destroy me and mine. And, O God, look with compassion upon thy distressed servant, who would freely offer up her life, in purity and innocence, for the good of heaven's righteous cause. Moreover, I humbly pray thee, O Lord of hosts, send thy messengers of grace to guard and protect my beloved and heroic Victor, whose strifes and struggles, on behalf of his race, are Herculean. God, grant me this humble supplication, and thy name shall have all the glory for ever and ever. Amen. A terrible noise, as it were rattling of chains, unbolting of gigantic doors, and groans of the most horrible character, now disturbed the suppliant, and suddenly the door, entering her cell, flew open, when she beheld a man in disguise standing before her. She swooned away. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 17. General Armington searching for his seduced daughter in Europe. General Washington Armington arrived in Liverpool in 16 days, when he at once went to headquarters of the detectives for the purpose of ascertaining the whereabouts of Victor Juno and his amiable daughter, Lucinda. Having been informed, before he left New York, that his truant child and her paramour were seen on consecutive days to reside at the Hotel de la Breau, on Grange Street, Liverpool. But on inquiry for such persons, a negative answer was given, because there were no persons, nor had been, stopping there that would answer the description in any way. This was a terrible disappointment to the general, and what to do was beyond his capacity to contrive. However, upon consultation with the chief of police, he was encouraged by the advice the chief gave him. Said he to the general, "You had better consult with Louis Kingdom, one of our foremost detectives, and although his price is extortionate, but if your people can be found, he can do it, provided they are on this continent." "I am fully persuaded that they sailed several weeks ago from New York to Liverpool, in the Scotia, and I was told that they had been repeatedly seen at the Hotel de la Breau; but, upon examination, I failed to ascertain of their whereabouts. However, as the man is a cunning rogue, I fear that he has bribed the proprietors of the hotel not to divulge anything concerning their appearance.
said General Armington. The general engaged Lewis Kingdom, the detective, to search for the elopists, and find his daughter if it cost $10,000. The detective said, "If they are on this globe, I will find them, and shortly." This assurance from so great an expert gave the general full satisfaction, so far as the securing of his daughter was concerned; but yet the general's mind was in one continually agitated and disturbed state. He endeavored to console himself by renewed devotion to the Church, but whenever he approached the orthodox religionists, something seemed to warn him, and almost tell him that this class of persons were the ones who caused all his trouble. Nevertheless, he continued to go amongst them, making many acquaintances, and very soon he received a long letter from Rev. Joe Pier, who consoled him amazingly, whilst at the same time a very pious deacon of his own faith called upon the general and told him that he was well acquainted with Deacon Rob Stew of America, who had very often mentioned the general's name to him when he was sojourning in America. The general took a wonderful pleasure in this English deacon's acquaintance, whilst the wily deacon was simply the co-conspirator of Deacon Rob Stew and the bloody conspirators. We will now call attention to the operations of the bloody conspirators, who had been holding several special meetings recently at Tabernacle Hall, for the purpose of keeping the general in Europe until Dr. Victor Juno was in his grave, or at the bottom of the ocean, where worms or sharks will devour his mouldering clay, as he endeavored to devour the doctrines of the elect saints. As for Miss Lucinda Armington, no one but Deacon Rob Stew seemed to care what became of her, whether she lived or died. Neither did they care a straw about the general, so long as they were safe from molestation by this Victor Juno. The deacon said, "Holy saints, I will promise you to take good care of Miss Lucinda Armington, so she shall be no trouble to the cause, nor to you personally. I have always loved the dear, innocent child, and take my holy word, I'll fix her to the advantage of all parties, and to her own satisfaction." "Surely our beloved and faithful deacon understands the charitable and nurturing business thoroughly, since I assure you he will do what pleases the Lord," said Nancy Clover. "But, brethren, we must contrive some plan by which we can banish all suspicion of the abduction business, should some one get wind of it, or the thing in any way prove a failure. You are all aware that I fear and tremble when I think of the bold work which we have taken into our hands; and although the elect cannot sin, still they are not infallible, else Victor Juno would have died at the hands of our faithful brother and doctor, Toy Pancy," exclaimed Rev. Joe Pier in an agitated state of mind. "Truly, good brother Pier, your remarks are wise and spoken in an opportune hour," said Dr. Toy Pancy, "for you must know that there are many infidels and atheists in this world, who would delight in acting as spies for the purpose of betraying us to the people, and I am sure 1 ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Moreover, if all things turn out right, there cannot arise any injury from the exercise of extreme precautionary measures. Supposing this vile agitator and coarse innovator should escape us—" "Nonsense!" interposed Deacon Rob Stew in an indignant and boisterous manner. "Patience, brother Stew, I have the floor; therefore please let me finish what I propose to say," said Dr. Toy Pancy. "Go on," exclaimed the Rev. Joe Pier. "Well, I was going to say, supposing Mr. or Dr. Juno should escape us, he would undoubtedly be bold and daring enough to at once mount the rostrum again, and expose our conduct toward him, when the people would very likely join him and mob us," said Dr. Toy Pancy. "Nonsense! You are a poor chicken-hearted dunce to reason thus. Have you no faith in God and in his elect? And do you suppose I have been idle all these days, and have done nothing to guard against such contingencies? You must take me to be a faithless fool. I have it in my power to ruin this Juno. Yes, a simple stroke from my pen will disgrace and quiet this innovator any time. But it must not be known publicly that I would stoop to undermine republican liberties, because I am an advocate of republicanism, and as you all know that the Republican party believes me to be a perfect saint, hence I hold them in the hollow of my hand so long as I can keep my secret acts away from them. We are told by Christ to pray and act in secret. Hence, I never throw such holy things before dogs, nor cast pearls before swine," exclaimed the holy deacon. A knock at the outer door caused all to remain quiet for a moment, until the sentinel should see who sought admission, when the physician-in-chief of the insane asylum rushed into the hall in an awfully excited state of mind, and said, "Victor Juno has escaped!" End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 18. Jemmy discovers Victor and Lucinda. It may be remembered that Pat O'Connor's wits were heavily exercised about this reported elopement affair. He could not see any philosophy in such an act on the part of either Dr. Juno or Miss Armington. Therefore he did not believe that they eloped, but he feared some foul play. And who but Deacon Rob Stew was guilty? Hence Pat endeavored to blarney the deacon so that he could get deeper into the latter's confidence. In fact, the deacon never suspicioned Pat of infidelity to him, but thought Pat O'Connor was his tried, true friend. Pat knew this, and therefore he said, "Dacon, yer honour, I have heerd sich talk aboot this Mishter Juno chap what makes me blood run could, but yer honour will not spake agin of this matter, will ye?" "Certainly not, Pat, but will you tell me what it is?" asked the deacon. "Och, be Saint Patrick, I belave that son of thy wicked papal started a talk that ye are the cause of Miss Lucinda, me mishtress, eloped wid dem Juno chap, because ye would not ax her to marry ye," said Pat. "Is that what you have heard?" interposed the deacon. "Yis, yer honour, that's it," said Pat. "Sure, Pat, you have heard nothing more, and you do not believe that, do you?" responded the deacon. "Howly Moses, yer honour, I do believe that Miss Armington was mad wid ye, because ye would not ax her fur to marry ye, and fur to spite ye, she runned away wid dis Mr. Juno. Do ye mind that?" said Pat. "No, my faithful Pat, but as you are a true friend of mine, in whom I feel sure I could entrust my life, I will give you a little insight into this matter. But, Pat, you must be secretive, and not mention it to a living soul," responded the deacon. "Howly Saint Patrick, I would not spake of it to the parson, and if it would shmash me life into smithereens. Believe me, yer honour," said Pat. "Oh, I do, good fellow. Well, Pat, Miss Lucinda Armington and Victor Juno did not elope, but they were abducted by some of the medical opponents of Victor Juno," ejaculated the deacon. "Abdoocted, yer honour! Bedad, and ye are sure on that, are ye?" said Pat. "Yes, Pat, I am sure of it," responded the deacon. "Howly saints! And ye know that me mishtress be murdered, and ye would not tell me mashter, but let him go to Europe fur to hunt his murdhered child? Oh, ye bloody curmudgeon, what do ye expect will become of ye?" furiously ejaculated Pat, who was now ready for a fight with the deacon. "Pat, you do not understand me," replied the deacon. "Begorra, and I do understand ye. Abdoocted, ye murdherin' hypocrite, and may the divil swallow ye whole body and soul if I don't tell on ye, and that this very hour, ye squally murdherer, for a helpin' to abduct me swate mishtress. And will ye tell me where ye have buried her?" exclaimed Pat. "Pat, you are crazy. Listen to me. She is not dead," replied the deacon, half scared to death, lest Pat might expose the whole matter in his excitable state of mind, for he saw Pat was ready for a fight. "Not dead!" exclaimed Pat, looking amazed, and continued, "How could she be abducted and be not dead?" "Now, Pat, calm yourself, and I will explain to you all about it. She is living, healthy, and will evidently be happy when I see her and offer myself in marriage to her," said the deacon. "Yer honor am not hoaxin', am ye?" exclaimed Pat, his countenance lighting up with delight. "Certainly not, good Pat. You evidently do not understand the meaning of abduction. Abduction means carefully taken away from danger," said the deacon. "Do it, yer honor? And I'm plazed it manes that. But, be jabbers, I t'ought it meant murder," responded Pat. "Well, Pat, you are now satisfied, are you not? And you will keep the secret, for I promise you all will be for the best," said Deacon Rob Stew. "Yis, sure, I am your faithful sarvant, as ye plaze to have me," ejaculated Pat, good humoredly and apparently satisfied. Pat returned to Judy McCrea, and cautiously told her that he suspected Deacon Rob Stew to be a dirty villain, when they agreed to watch the deacon's movements. On Saturday afternoon, Jemmy, the overseer of the insane asylum, generally visited Pat and Judy. The three were sitting in the dining room of General Washington Armington's residence, discussing the question of the day. Pat said, "Jemmy, ye have a fine plaze for the poor lunatic, and whin ye showed meself and Judy, darlin', the inner of the asylum, why did ye not take us to them other parts?" "Sure, I'd like to see all of 'em," said Judy. "Pat, it is not allowed to take strangers into the private departments," replied Jemmy. "Private divils, I believe that ye keep them places for to smuggle dacent people away," ejaculated Pat. "Pat, now do ye think we are cutthroats in our asylum?" angrily responded Jemmy. "Jemmy, dear," said Judy, "excuse Pat, for ye knows he bees much worried about the good darlin' Mistress Lucinda, who he belaves is smuggled up in that plaze." "Yes, Jemmy, will you do me one kind favor?" said Pat. "Certainly, dear Pat, I will," responded Jemmy. "Thin kape an eye on them private plazes, and ye may see me mistress in there," said Pat. "Pat, in faith ye are mistaken, but I'll do it and tell ye of it if I see anything," replied Jemmy. These three parted good friends, and although Jemmy could not harbor a thought in his mind that would reflect upon the virtuous conduct of the managers of the asylum, but, thought he, it cannot do any harm for me to peep around and satisfy my mind, and should I find anything wrong, I might help to right it, and should I find all straight, no harm is done. The following Sunday, Jemmy was ordered by the physician in chief to oversee the private departments, as the latter should be compelled to leave the asylum that day. This pleased Jemmy, and he took the first opportunity afforded him to see who occupied the cell on the 3rd floor, where Deacon Rob Stew recently visited so often. For sure, if Miss Lucinda Armington should be in the asylum, that is the place where she would be confined. With little trouble he unbolted the outside doors, which gave him an opportunity to peep quietly into her cell, and, to his amazement, there he beheld, reclining on the neat little cot, Miss Armington, sleeping sweetly. This almost stunned Jemmy's sensibilities, and he was now ready to believe anything and everything that might be said either of the asylum or of its managers. He quietly retired from the spot, and at once made his way to the basement dungeons, where, however, he could not peep, because there was no light in those cells, but he went to the door of the dungeon and tried to unbolt it, when he heard a peculiar noise in a distant part of the corridor, which scared him away from his intended design for the present. He went upstairs and found that they had brought a very crazy patient into the asylum, and after he was stored safely away, he got another set of keys and returned to the dungeon, and succeeded in opening the outside door, which gave him access to call the prisoner. He said, Victor Juno! Victor Juno! Then listened, when he heard a low, stifled voice reply, Who calls me? I am Victor Juno. End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turasek. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 19. Deacon Stew Threatens to Shoot Jemmy. It will be remembered that on a preceding occasion, when Pat O'Connor and Deacon Rob Stew were in conversation at General Armington's house, Judy McCrea suddenly screamed murder in another part of the mansion, which disturbed the two connivers in carrying out their deviltry. Pat O'Connor, who was blarneying Deacon Rob Stew, was delighted that something happened to distract the attention of the deacon's mind from the subject that was under discussion, and it may have been a godsend that Judy McCrea was caused to scream murder at the top of her voice. Pat and the deacon at once repaired to the spot, where Judy was imagining that she was being in a terrible conflict with bloody murderers. But they discovered nothing, except that Judy said she had been tired, and whilst reclining on a lounge fell asleep, and had a horrible dream. No one inquired about the dream, and even Judy herself seemed then not to care or think it of any moment. However, a few weeks later, Judy's mind one day was bewildered, and when Pat asked her what was the matter, she said that the dream she had a few weeks ago impressed her mind so strangely that she could not rest. But she could not tell exactly what the dream was like. Pat said, "Me darlin', can ye not tell your Pat what ye seed in your dream?" "Yis, dear Pat, the thing just come to me mind. I thought I was a talkin' wid the lovely mistress, when a dirty, rough man come along, and, throwin' a murderin' cap over her head, what choked me darlin' mistress, when she could not spake, and I tried to help her, but me body was very stiff, and I could not do nothin' for her, when they tooked her off on a wagon," said Judy McCrea. "Darlin' Judy, why did ye not spake of it before now?" exclaimed Pat. "I have not thought of it, and I am sartin that me lady be's in that place where Jemmy be's, over yonder in West Philadelphy, for I mind not that I seed her taked in the wagon to that place, and carried up 3 stairs, and put in a small room that looks as a prison more than an asylum," said Judy. "Och, Judy, ye be's a dreamin' just now," laughingly replied Pat. "No, Pat, ef ye love me, belave me, for I sees me swart lady jist now settin' all alone by herself, a weepin' as a child," said Judy, with tears in her eyes, and sniffling as though she really was in sympathy with the poor young lady. It may seem curious, but it was nevertheless true, that the spirit of Judy was hovering around Miss Lucinda Armington in a clairvoyant state, and whilst Judy and Pat were talking over these matters, Jemmy, the overseer, knocked at the door, and being asked into the room, at once said: "My good friends, I have news to tell ye. I have watched my chance at the asylum, and when I was authorized to superintend the secret departments, I looked into one of the 3rd-story cells, where, to my sorrow and surprise, I seen your lovely Mistress Armington." "Och, murder, Pat, and have I not told ye so? But ye would not belave," ejaculated Judy. "Jemmy, bedad, ye confound me with sick news. Howsomever, I thought that your squally deacon was up to any diviltry, and sure sartin he was the chafe apostle in this work of Satan, and sure it am quare that my darlin' Judy should be dramin' all about it," responded Pat. "Dear Jemmy, did ye spake to my lady?" asked Judy. "No, Judy dear, I only was wantin' to know if she were there. She were asleep and I peeped through the door hole," responded Jemmy. "Well, Jemmy, and do ye now belave me, whin I said them chaps were hypocrites?" said Pat. "Yis, dear Pat, I belave anything, after having seen Miss Lucinda Armington lying on a cot, tight asleep in that cosy cell. I would tell ye that I have also discovered that Mr. Victor Juno be in the new dungeon, in the basement," replied Jemmy. "Bloody murder! Be me sowl, ye knock me brains straight out by tellin' me all sich talk. Do ye mane to say that Dr. Victor Juno am caged up widin that cellar dungeon?" said Pat, half crazed and furiously indignant. "Yis, Pat, he is there, but he won't be long comin' out of it, if I knows it," exclaimed Jemmy. Jemmy, being a good, honest Christian, would not cooperate with anyone, or work for anyone, whom he found to be dishonest and criminal. Therefore he made up his mind to set Victor Juno and Miss Lucinda Armington at liberty, after which he would leave the asylum. But how to go about this without being exposed, and without danger to the prisoners' lives and future prosperity, was a puzzling question. He planned in various ways to cause the escape of Victor Juno, but always failed to see his way clear. However, he might furnish the half-starved man with better and more food, until he regained his strength, when a cold chisel and heavy hammer might answer his purpose. Besides, he might leave the bolts in Victor Juno's dungeon doors slipped, a few days previous to his attempt to escape, when he would not be working in that department on the time Victor should make his escape. This would remove suspicion from Jemmy. Moreover, he might furnish Victor Juno with a rope, which undoubtedly should be of great service to him. All this Jemmy did, and he informed Victor which way to leave the asylum, on what day and in the middle of the night as near as he could do so. Jemmy did not worry so much about Miss Lucinda Armington as he did over Victor Juno, because she had comfortable quarters. Besides, her father was in Europe, but Victor was in a dark, damp, sickly cell, where death surely would end his miseries in a short time, unless he was set at liberty. Moreover, his business was suffering by this most foul incarceration. When Jemmy had given Victor Juno all the trappings and information, he made an excuse to visit some of his relatives in the country, who were sick, and the physician in chief, being willing to grant any favor to his most faithful overseer, permitted Jemmy a week's leave of absence. As Jemmy was about quitting the asylum for the purpose of making his visit, Deacon Robstew entered the institution, and at once confronted Jemmy and said: "Come with me, instantly, and hesitate not, or I'll blow your Irish brains out with this pistol, you vile conspirator." End of chapter 19. Recording by Meg Turasek. Chapter 20 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turasek. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 20. Lucinda nearly murders the deacon in her cell. In the cell where Miss Lucinda Armington was confined there was but one window, a skylight, which had shutters that could be closed in a moment by the keepers and managers. And when the man in disguise appeared before Miss Armington, and he saw that she swooned away, he suddenly darkened the cell by closing said shutters, thinking that she would be more readily restored and conquered in darkness than in light. Moreover, she might detect the disguised person if too much light shone upon him. He laid her on the cot, and when she came to, he said: "I have come to offer you freedom, and my heart and hand in marriage, and I hope you will not refuse me this request," said the disguised monster. "Sir, who are you that dares to insult me thus, and why have you darkened this prison cell? Are your intentions so dark and foul that you cannot present them in the light of day?" exclaimed Miss Armington. "I am a man of tender affections toward you, but as I have lately noticed you to conspire with a vile atheist, I felt it my duty to separate you from him until you have time to repent. Fiend that you are, do you suppose for one moment that a woman could or would yield to a man's wishes who can be guilty of so foul a deed?" interposed Miss Armington, and continued: "Further, I would like to know by whose authority and by what august power you have taken this outrageous task upon yourself to abduct and cast me into this prison. Dear lady, you are haughty. I really admire your high-toned spirit, but your desire to be stubborn or sarcastic will not profit you aught. Neither will you receive your liberty until you yield to my desires," said the disguised man. "Monster, have you lost your manhood? And how could you expect a woman to accept the proposals of a man or beast, which uses such criminal measures to gain the hand of woman?" responded Miss Armington. "Go on with your sophistries, but methinks you will be very glad to accept my offer. Now come, let us understand each other. I am handsome, rich, influential, religious, and only 15 or 20 years your senior," said the monster, quite coolly. "You are handsome, rich, influential, religious, and only 15 or 20 years my senior. Why is it, then, that you cause total darkness in this cell, and disguise yourself? You should show your beauty, and give the woman of your philanthropic choice an opportunity to behold that handsome person, whose wealth, influence, and religion are so prominent. Indeed, your acts exhibit very holy attributes of piety. But as to wealth and riches, I have not the least doubt that by your demoniacal deeds you are capacitated to wring money from the thousands, and with its corrupting power influence whole communities of your equals in crime," sharply exclaimed Miss Armington, without fear or falter. "Heigh ho! But you are a philosopher, as well as a charming damsel. By my soul, I am taking renewed fancies for the jewel which I have found," ejaculated the disguised man. "Do you think, sir, that you can conquer me? Do you dare to beard the tigress in her den? You have brought me here, for some motive best known to yourself, and whilst you have not the manly courage to show me your features in the light, you may think that you have me in your power, and can badger and insult me as you choose. But I now warn you to beware how you provoke me, lest by some miraculous power I strike you to my feet, and bruise your venomous head," furiously ejaculated Miss Armington. "Sweet lady, you would not do all that, at one time, would you, darling of my heart?" responded the intruder sarcastically, whilst he took hold of her arm. This latter act so enraged the helpless lady that she sprang to her feet, and quick as lightning made for the monster's head and face, tearing his mask and disguise from him with Herculean strength, whilst she dealt him blow after blow upon his mouth and nose, until the hot blood flew in every direction. He was not prepared for such summary chastisement, hence, before he knew what he was about, he was apparently helpless, and he humbly begged her pardon. "But," she said furiously, "go, leave me, or I'll murder you, before you will be able to gain help." He humbly responded, "I'll go. Give me a moment to collect my senses." "Go!" she ejaculated in a voice that meant a second beating. He instantly disappeared through a secret door, and as he was closing it exclaimed, "I'll be a match for you when I can call again." She ran to the secret door, but it closed and bolted, seeming like a wall of adamant. End of chapter 20. Recording by Meg Turasek.
Chapter 21 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Demick. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 21. Victor's Vision in a Dream in His Dungeon. Dr. Victor Juno was left all night lying on the hard, damp, cemented floor of the dungeon, without removing even as much as the gag. But about 8 o'clock in the morning, several rough men came to his presence, when they removed the shackles and left him without saying a word. He asked them what was the object of this malicious conduct, but not a syllable was answered, and the men left him to surmise what was in store for him. He now got upon his feet. However, it was as much as he could do to stand erect without tumbling to the ground, and managed to stagger to the place where the men seemed to come in and go out. But upon closely examining it, he found nothing but a small offset, and a rough iron door without a single aperture in its construction. He next followed the wall around, examining every inch from the ground floor to as high as he could reach, but, alas, nothing was detected except a roughly plastered wall, and after a long search for a spot from which air or light might be received, he found himself back again in the doorway. Now he laid down on the floor, stretching his hands and feet in every direction, trying to measure his prison house, and also for the purpose of ascertaining if any furniture or opening could be discovered. But, oh horror! Horror! Nothing but one blank, dark dungeon was surrounding this son of toil. He sat himself as comfortably as possible on the floor, inclining his back against the wall, and listened for what seemed to him nearly an hour, but all was silent as the tomb. He was getting thirsty and hungry, and he wondered if this was a plan to starve him to death, or what can be the object of this foul conspiracy to incarcerate him in this horrible dungeon. Presently he fell into a sleep, when he dreamed that he was traveling over the continent of Europe, where he met General Washington Armington, who was in terrible distress about the loss of his daughter Lucinda. The latter at once accused him, Dr. Juno, of being the seducer of his lovely daughter, and said to him, "Dr. Juno, prepare yourself to meet your God, for I am going to shoot you forthwith." "My dear General, you greatly wrong me. I have always treated your daughter with profound respect. Moreover, you forget that I have jeopardized my miserable life to save hers, and I would do so 1,000 times over for the fair, virtuous damsel. Why then do you accuse me of ruining your child? Have you no more confidence in me than that?" spoke Victor Juno to the general, to which the latter seemed to smile and walked away. Suddenly there appeared an angel before Dr. Juno, who had several beautiful emblems in his right hand, and the angel held up one of them and said, "This represents a youth whose wisdom excels his vanity, and who, if he prove true to his intuitive gifts, will be compelled to go through a fiery furnace for a brief season. But if he continues to trust in an overruling, just, and infinite God, will have this crown set upon his head." And now the angel presented another emblem, which appeared to look like a rainbow, inside of which hosts of cherubims were embracing each other, until the entire brotherhood of mankind seemed to be enchanted with the power and hallowed blessedness of the beneficent Creator of all things. In the left hand the angel held a dark ring, which had unsightly leprous spots upon it, and which poured forth fiery vipers. The angel said, "If you prove faithless and fearful, you will inherit this crown, which is prepared for all who flag and faint in the hour of persecution." The angel disappeared, and the prisoner woke up amazed to find himself thus. He continued a long time in the same position on the damp cemented floor, and meditated as follows. "I have had a peculiar dream, a beautiful dream, but what is there in dreams? Great God, since I am deserted by man, I thank thee for having permitted an angel from yonder realms of the blessed to come unto me, and direct me what course I shall pursue to accomplish my work. I shall heed the admonition, and bear patiently all that my persecutors can heap upon me, knowing that I am in the right. I must also be convinced that God will not permit me to die for naught. And what can it matter to the naturalist whether he is sacrificed in one way or another, only so that his beloved cause may prosper?" The man philosophized in this manner for hours, forgetting thereby that he was in a dungeon and powerless, but he imagined that he was growing stronger and of more moment hourly, until finally he changed his bodily position, when hunger and thirst seemed to overpower him. But presently he heard a noise. His prison gates were moving, and a keeper brought him a loaf of bread and a mug of water. Oh, how grateful to God and his persecutors was he for this little kindness, for, he thought, they don't mean to starve me, and I hope for a safe deliverance from this dungeon. And should I escape and see my beloved Lucinda again, I would be too happy. Yes, and I should preach to the people once more my beloved sentiments, and also inform them of my sufferings on their behalf. Truly, had I done as my persecutors desire all men to do, I would now be the successful pastor of some wealthy congregation, with plenty of wealth and more glory of men than any of the rest, because, with my knowledge of human nature, I could be the greatest hypocrite and saintliest Pharisee. But my zeal runs in an opposite direction, and I shall hold out faithfully to the end, and though my wounded soul bleeds to exhaustion. I have already suffered much for my audacity in presenting a purer and more Christ-like piety than the fashionable sectarian world upholds, but yet I have not endured what Jesus and his apostles had to undergo. This is a consolation, that there is a hereafter, where we shall be rewarded according to the deeds, not the blind faith, done in the body. It must not be forgotten that Dr. Juno had comparatively few friends who cared enough for him and his doctrines to put themselves out of the way for him, except Miss Lucinda Armington, who, however, was as firmly locked up in the asylum as he was himself, probably because they were so near to each other, yet unaware of the fact, caused them to be more buoyant than they would have been had they been far apart. Both of them felt certain that the other was being persecuted at the selfsame hour, because the bloody conspirators knew all about their love for each other, hence this persecution. Victor Juno loved her dearly. In fact, he worshipped the ground she walked on. But, notwithstanding all this, he was more deeply concerned about his cause of reform. He considered the improvement of the human race as preeminently of more moment than the happiness of the few, and as his religion convinced his mind that God was just, if man was unjust, he deemed it of little importance whether he suffered martyrdom or not. He was receiving no attention in his dungeon, beside a loaf of bread and a mug of water daily, which was no deprivation to a vegetarian like himself, although the bloody conspirators thought that he would soon sink and starve to death on such a regimen. But instead of that, he gained solid flesh, and when Jemmy had learned that he was a prisoner there, he increased the quantity and improved the quality of his food. Although Dr. Juno gained in flesh, he became more tender, and often felt prostrated, probably more on account of the vitiated atmosphere which he was bound to inhale than from anything else. One day, after he had been feeling particularly prostrated, Jemmy made this discovery, that Dr. Juno was a prisoner within that most terrible dungeon, and whilst Jemmy was cogitating what he had better do to save the benefactor, he overheard two jealous servants of the asylum say to one another that they suspected Jemmy of being engaged in a plot to ruin their reputation with the managers, and that they would set a trap for him and turn the tables on him if they could. They watched their opportunity to get a chance to speak to Deacon Rob Stew, who was their particular friend, as he was instrumental in getting them into the institution, because they were Protestant saints. And when they saw the deacon, one of them said to him, "Brother Stew, George and myself have discovered a deep plot, which is now being worked up by several of the Catholic help, which will greatly injure the asylum if it succeeds." "What is it, William?" asked the deacon. "You will not expose us if we tell you, for the Irish Catholics are wicked enough to murder us should they find out what we told on them," said George. "Never fear your deacon," responded the viper, feeling terribly nervous, because the guilty conscience needs no accuser. "Well, it is this. Jemmy, the Irish overseer, is trying to have all Protestant help removed from the various wards of the asylum, and have Catholics installed in our stead. He thinks that there are now some secret matters going on in this institution that could not occur were they to occupy the entire control of the prisoners," said William. "Great God," meditated the deacon, "can Jemmy know that Victor Juno and Miss Lucinda Armington are confined within these walls? I must contrive a plan to have him forthwith arrested and removed from the asylum, and also deprive him of his liberty, or I am ruined. In fact, the whole brotherhood would be disgraced. Never mind, Jemmy, what cannot I do to prevent my plans from failing, and your arrest and speedy conviction is a fixed fact." It will be remembered that Jemmy was arrested by the deacon himself, as he was leaving the asylum to visit his country friends. But, as the inauspicious moment would have it, Pat O'Connor and Judy McCree, excited and awfully indignant, met the deacon and Jemmy just as the latter twain were in angry consultation, when Pat blustered forth, "Deacon, your honour, begorra, I'll have satisfaction or I'll expose the whole thing." End of chapter 21. Recording by William Demick.
Chapter 22 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 22. Victor's terrific struggle with the night watchman. Although Jemmy aroused the suspicion of the managers of the insane asylum concerning Victor Juno and Miss Lucinda Armington's incarceration, they nevertheless did not for one moment suspicion that he had done anything to aid the escape of Dr. Juno. The only thing then that was to be done was to silence Jemmy from spreading the news. Neither were they certain that Jemmy knew of the imprisonment of these reported elopists. The physician-in-chief did not believe, would not believe, that Jemmy could be unfaithful to him or to the welfare of the asylum. Moreover, he had no access to any of the secret cells to ascertain who was therein confined. How, then, could he know anything about it? Deacon Rob Stew said he arrested Jemmy because George and William told him of a plot which would greatly injure the asylum, and he came to the conclusion that it was nothing long or short of an expose of the incarceration of Dr. Juno and Miss Armington. And what confirmed his suspicions was that Jemmy, Pat O'Connor, and Judy McCrae were very intimate friends. Moreover, when Pat and Judy came to the asylum in a rage, threatening to expose the whole thing, what other opinion could a guilty man arrive at, except that there was a knowledge afloat of the inner workings of this holy institution? The physician-in-chief requested that an investigation should be made forthwith. In fact, Jemmy should receive a secret trial by the Brotherhood, and if found guilty, should speedily be convicted in the Court of Sessions before a certain pious judge who belongs to the bloody clique, and who would rule out any evidence that would be favorable to Jemmy, misconstrue the law, and sentence him for life to the penitentiary. Whilst the secret trial of Jemmy took place, the time arrived for Dr. Victor Juno to make his escape. Precisely at midnight, Dr. Juno tied the rope around his stalwart form, and taking his cold chisel in one hand and the hammer in the other, he quietly opened the unbolted doors of his cell, and in a moment stood in the corridor without a thought of being unsuccessful in making good his escape. But he had to do some dreadful work before he was on free soil. He walked up a short flight of winding stairs, but his progress was impeded by a huge iron door. What to do was a puzzle, because it was so dark that he could not see anything, nor could he detect any bolt, lock, or hinges to this door, and it was utterly impossible to hew down the same. He, however, tried to find a place by which his cold chisel might be used to pry it open. Still, all attempts proved a failure. Now, what should he do? He placed his ear to the keyhole, which was the only aperture he could find, and listened, but all was quiet. He then soliloquized thus: "I have gained a great point in getting out of my dungeon, but how to make my way out of this corridor is more than I know, which is in itself a perfect prison. I shall not be expected here, much less does any one but Jemmy dream that I have these implements of destruction in my possession. Truly, I might wait here until morning, and when the keeper comes, could easily dispatch him. But I do not desire to become a murderer. But wait, I have it. I'll prepare this rope by cutting it into pieces with this chisel, and as soon as the keeper opens the door, I'll grab and bind him. But if he attempts to create a noise, I'll be compelled to dispatch him like a bullock. But I shall tell him first to be silent, when I won't harm a hair on his head. But should there be 2 or 3 of them together, what then will best be done? I have it, surely. I will knock them all dumb with this flat cold chisel, and before they will be able to come to, I will have them bound hand and foot, and if I can, shall lock them in this corridor. Still I have nothing wherewith to gag them, and they might scream loud enough to attract others to aid them. Ha! I have got it. I'll drag them into my dungeon and bolt the door on them. That is, if I can find the key to it. I'll go and see if there is any key in either door, or if there are any means of fastening the same without a key. Here it is, an outside bolt. I will now return and wait behind the stair door until morning. But why could I not create some noise to arouse the night watchman? He might not be far away, and without hesitation unbolt the door to see what was wrong. I'll try a deep, distant moan by ventriloquism, as if some dungeon prisoners were very ill, and if this fail, I'll increase the sounds until I shall bring someone or more." He now groaned in a deep voice through the keyhole, and in a moment he heard someone approach the door, who seemed to listen for a few minutes, when he repeated his moan, throwing it into his cell. This caused the night watchman to unbolt the huge iron door, when he went directly toward Juno's dungeon, and opening the feed slide, placed his ear evidently to it to listen to the groans. Now was Dr. Juno's time to quiet his keeper, but he first quietly took the key, which the latter let remain in the outside of the stair door, and placed it inside of the lock, closed the door, bolted it, and pocketed the key. Then he quietly went in the direction of his dungeon, and before he knew what he was about, he struck his head against the keeper's, and quick as lightning they grappled, but being somewhat feeble, found that he had a pretty good match in the diminutive keeper. They scuffled about the place in a most terrible manner, one moment one being on the top, and the next minute the other, until Victor Juno got his hand into the long hair of his antagonist. When the keeper asked for mercy, Victor Juno could not continue to punish his victim uselessly, and as he felt nearly done over himself, said, "If I let you loose, will you promise me to be docile and perfectly quiet? I mean, make no noise." "Certainly I will," responded the keeper. But he was no sooner loose than he made for the stair door, thinking, "I shall lock you, devil or lunatic, up until you can be secured." But, oh horror! The lunatic had locked the door of exit, and what could he do but face the demon or scream for help? Victor Juno heard him scramble for the door when he said in a low tone, "Sir, you are not as good as your word, therefore I shall be under the disagreeable necessity of compelling you to be silent." The poor trembling keeper interposed, "What do you want me to do?" "Sir, I want your promise to keep silent, and come over here and sit quietly down on the floor until daylight," said Victor Juno in a commanding and stern voice, which thrilled the scared victim, and although he had no weapon of defense with him, he nevertheless ejaculated, "If you come near me again, I will shoot or stab you. I have both a revolver and a dirk ready for action." "Indeed, sir, then I shall be compelled to beat your brains out with the huge hammer which I hold in my hand. So you see that two can play at this little game," exclaimed Victor Juno. "Tell me, who are you, and what do you want? You seem to be sane," said the keeper. "Yes, sir, I fear that I am too sane and powerful for you. But who and what I am or want here can be no affair of yours this night. So you better obey my orders, when not a hair on your head shall be harmed," kindly responded Victor Juno. "Great God, he's mad," thought the poor victim, and said aloud, "Did you bolt this door?" "Yes, sir, I did, and have the key of it in my possession," replied Victor Juno, and continued earnestly, "I say, will you obey me? Speak and act, or I'll send you swift as lightning into the next world." This caused the half-frightened keeper to scream "Murder!" when Victor made one leap in the direction of the voice and struck him in the temple with his fist, which caused him to reel and spin like a top. Thus Victor Juno sent his victim away into the dark corridor beyond his reach. Therefore he began to fish and reach for the sickened and scared watchman, cautiously dreading the pistol or dirk of which he spoke. After searching for several minutes, Victor listened with ears and mouth wide open. When he heard the keeper breathe cautiously, he neared the breathing apparatus, and when he was sure he was within the distance of arm's length, he reached for his throat, whilst he managed to grab him simultaneously by the shoulder and reeled him around, and with lightning velocity grasped his arms by the elbows and forced them together, when he took a piece of rope and bound them securely, and said, "Now, sir, I think your pistol and dirk won't avail you much, and I implore you to give them to me, or I'll handle you very roughly." Furiously exclaimed Victor Juno. "I have neither pistol nor dirk," stammered the victim. "Then I'll send you to my cell." And no sooner said than he moved him along the corridor to where Victor's cell door was, and opening it, ushered him uncouthly forth into the cell, and closed and bolted the same. End of chapter 22. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 23 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 23. Thrilling prison scene between Lucinda and Deacon Stew. Miss Lucinda Armington was not visited or molested by any one for several days after the disguised and whipped monster suddenly disappeared from her presence through a secret door. Therefore she had time for reflection. She thought almost continually about her beloved Victor. What was he doing, or where might he be at that moment? Oh, if she could only meet him once more, only for a short hour, how happy she would be. Her appetite failed her, and she could not sleep without continually dreaming the most horrible things, and her dear Victor would always appear in her dreams, who was surrounded by reptiles and vermin of the nastiest character, which did their best to bite and sting him to the heart. when he would weep and wail for assistance. And although she saw it all, and he begged her to assist him, she was entirely powerless, and could not as much as say a kind word to him, or keep these venomous pests away from him. After waking from these awful dreams, she always felt that her betrothed and beloved Victor was surrounded by fiends, or was even then undergoing severe punishment for serving God and man. She endeavored to console herself by scriptural passages, but she had not the nerve and faith that were necessary to face such martyrdom. Although she was not thinking of her own sufferings, but of the dangers and tortures that threatened dear Victor. Whilst in the midst of these meditations, early in the morning a private door opened, and Deacon Rob Stew stood before her. At first she felt like flying to him and embracing him, because he was an old friend of the family and good deacon. The deacon saw she looked kindly upon him, which made him bold, when he advanced toward her and said, "My dear Lucinda, I am delighted to see you, although very sorry to find you in this place." Like lightning, the thought flashed through her brain, "You scoundrel can disassemble beautifully," and her countenance changed to a frown, and hatred looked out of her determined eyes when the pious deacon asked, "What is the matter with my sweet child? Do not look so distressed. I have come to offer you freedom and my heart and hand in marriage." "Avaunt, you fiend! I know you now, and you need not dissemble and act the hypocrite any longer. I say, you better be gone, or I'll give you another beating that will leave worse marks than the one you now carry on your nose. Do you hear me? Be gone!" furiously ejaculated Miss Armington, who was fully convinced that the disguised man whom she had pummeled a few days before in this cell, and that in the dark, was this saintly deacon. He now flew into a passion, and said, "Miss Armington, how dare you insult me in this way, when I came to you in the kindest manner, and with the holiest intentions? You are an ingrate, who deserves no better treatment than you're receiving in this cell, and I shall leave you in a moment, as you requested. But before I go, let me say that I am Deacon Rob Stew, and I would have you know that my power and influence is greater than any monarch in Europe. Therefore, beware how you insult and cast me off. You are Deacon Rob Stew, the powerful and influential saint, yes, and you were handsome before I destroyed your beautiful nose the other day, when I beat you like a howling cur." "You beat me like a howling cur," interposed the deacon. "When and how was that?" "If you don't leave me, I'll show you how," exclaimed Miss Armington, her eyes flashing fire and fury. The deacon rather winced, and feared that she might make another onslaught on his saintly carcass, when he changed the conversation and said, very sanctimoniously, "My dear young sister, now come, let us be serious, and talk like Christians, not like sinners. For you must know that I love you, have always hoped you would become my wife, and had it not been for that profligate innovator Victor Juno, I undoubtedly would have remained foremost in your affections. May the curse of an avenging God fall upon your leprous tongue, and the spirit of unrest never cease to molest and torture your wicked soul, until you retract every word that you have ever spoken against that honorable gentleman. Yes, may God sow thorns and thistles in your path, that your body may be pricked and torn to pieces by them, as you have endeavored to lacerate mine and the noble Victor's hearts by your bloody conspiracies against us both. You are a detestable villain, and I wonder that you are not afraid that God will strike you dead forthwith and send your loathsome soul into the regions of everlasting torment. Do you hear that?" "Now you have my sentiments, therefore leave me instantly," interposed Miss Armington, in a manner that meant mischief. "I pray you listen for a moment to me, and then, if you're not satisfied, I will quit you forever." "Downheartedly," said the deacon. "Well, say on then. But no more insults. Remember that, responded Miss Armington. You blame me for things of which I am entirely innocent. I have never conspired against you, but I cannot say that much for Victor Juno. Accused falsifier that you are, would you damn your own hypocritical soul over and over by adding insult to injury? Interrupted she. Hear me through, said he. Before you become so severe, I do not wish to shield myself from any crime or sin that I may have committed on your behalf. What do you mean, interrupted Miss Armington, by saying that you have committed crime or sin in my behalf? My dear Lucinda, I love you, and love is blind to everything. It was this extreme affection for you, sweet lady, that drove me to commit acts that nothing else in the world could have driven me to do, sorrowfully said the deacon. I have never done anything to encourage you in that direction, and if what you say is true, of which I have my doubts, I pity you. But that is all the consolation you can ever expect from me. Even had I possessed any regard for you, the acts which you have committed against him, whose very footprints I love more than the entire existence of thousands like yourself, would have caused me to spurn you, indignantly ejaculated Miss Armington. Is there, then, no hope for me? I was told by Pat O'Connor that you only took to Victor Juno because I did not propose marriage to you, said he. Are you fool enough to believe what my servant told you? She exclaimed. Why should I not have believed it? Did you not always treat me kindly, and appeared glad to see me at your house, until that innovator made his appearance? Said Deacon Stew. Sir, if you desire my audience, even in this prison cell, cease to call my beloved Victor names, or I'll refuse to listen to you, proudly exclaimed Miss Armington, looking at him as if she really detested him. Well, proud lady, said he, I then shall be compelled to remove this beloved Victor from your reach, and unless you promise to lend me your ear and give me some hope, I shall cause his death. What? Would you become a murderer? Would you add this foul crime to your already blackened deeds done in the body? Avaunt, I say, or I'll tear you limb from limb, you miserable fiend, and save you the trouble or pleasure of injuring my beloved Victor, most furiously exclaimed Miss Armington, who was now almost insane with fear and horror, lest her faithful betrothed should be made to suffer tortures on her account. She thought, for aught I know, he is now enduring the pangs of a lingering death, because I am sure that this vile deacon would be guilty of anything to gain his selfish and brutal ends. O Victor, Victor! May the infinite hand of Jehovah protect and guard you against the wiles, plots, and conspiracies of these bloody people. What have you ever done to injure them? What have you ever done to injure anyone? You are so noble, so benevolent, so very generous, and so zealous to improve your race, that I cannot see what benefit it is to a man to do good in this world. After looking upon her for a few minutes with dumbfounded amazement, the deacon said, What are you thinking about, Miss Armington? Do you not feel well? If I have caused you pain, I humbly ask your pardon, and if my presence distresses you, I will leave you. But can I not hope for a little encouragement? No, you cannot, but you can drive me mad. And then you may be able to justify yourself before your brethren and the world for placing me in this cell. This may be the object of your visits here. So now then, please, leave me. When she fainted, dead away. End of chapter 23. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 24 of The Social War of 1900. or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 24. Dr. Victor Juno's Escape from His Dungeon. Jemmy the Overseer had a secret trial by the bloody conspirators, and upon the evidence given by George and William, who perjured themselves, Jemmy was pronounced guilty, and a true bill of indictment was found against him the next day, when he was tried in the Court of Sessions before a judge and prosecuting attorney who belonged to the bloody clique. However, it must be remembered that Victor Juno escaped before Jemmy's public trial took place, which confirmed Deacon Rob Stew's former suspicion of the guilt of Jemmy, and therefore additional witnesses were placed upon the stand. The night watchman, whom Dr. Juno locked up in his cell the night of the tussle, was a first-class witness for the conspirators, and of course Jemmy was found guilty of felony and sentenced forthwith for life to solitary confinement in the Eastern Penitentiary. This gave a quietus to the only man who really knew anything positive of the workings of the asylum, except Pat O'Connor and Judy McCrae, and when they learned how summarily Jemmy was dispatched, they very likely would be silent, lest they might be served in the same way. Deacon Rob Stew sought an interview with Pat O'Connor as soon as he had an opportunity, after he met him and Judy McCrae at the asylum, when he had arrested Jemmy, and said, "Pat, I want to know what you meant by coming into my presence in the asylum and ejaculating so furiously that you would expose the whole thing, the day that I arrested Jemmy the conspirator. Was it you who was in conspiracy with Jemmy?" "Och, me St. Patrick, your honour, should know me better than that," said Pat. "What did you mean when you said you would expose the whole thing?" responded the deacon. "Expose the whole ting," ejaculated Pat, and stammering, "Well, I was told by that Master Juno's servant that you had murdered me Mistress Armington, and that Mr. Juno cammed home from visiting a sick person a long ways away. This is what was the whole ting, what I was saying I'd expose." "Pat, are you telling me the truth?" asked the deacon. "And may me soul cease to live if it ain't," solemnly said Pat, who, however, had other ideas. But he considered an ounce of policy might be worth 10,000 pounds of truth just now, and he knew well enough if the deacon had the least suspicion of him being informed of Miss Lucinda Armington and Dr. Victor Juno being, or having been, in their philanthropic insane asylum, he would cause his and Judy McCrae's arrest, conviction, and imprisonment, and although as Dr. Juno is at liberty, he had better not be seen in Juno's company, else mischief might befall him and his Judy. Pat was no fool in reasoning thus, and especially as the deacon looked determined and spoke very threateningly. Pat considered discretion the better part of valor. The bloody conspirators at this stage of proceedings had to make powerful efforts to stigmatize Dr. Juno as a wicked monster, an awful liar, for they felt certain that he would at once pounce upon the rostrum and expose all he knew. But the influence of all the religious denominations who believe everything the bloody conspirators say was immense, and by the hue and cry against Dr. Juno as the seducer, eloper, and deserter of Miss Lucinda Armington, he could be held up to such scorn and contempt that his practice as a physician would be utterly ruined, and few, if any, would dare to go near him. There was only one thing to be dreaded, his tongue in the rostrum, for the wicked and curious people will go to hear him, and he has a way of addressing them that convinces thousands that he is in the right. Now, something must be done to stop him from preaching in large halls or theaters, or they, the conspirators, would as sure be ruined as water runs downhill. They could easily prevent their followers and even the great majority of the worldlings from believing anything that Dr. Juno might say, so far as his incarceration was concerned. But when he gets a chance to preach or write for a paper, he argues in such a manner as to positively show his auditors and readers that his doctrines are sound, and prove to everyone that all the religionist views and teachings are antichrist and anti-natural, although the very hearers or readers who are convinced that his logic is correct, nevertheless may not believe him to be an honest or truthful man. Hence, it is no trouble for the elect to say that he has been away with Miss Armington. If he should say that the saints abducted him or Miss Armington and imprisoned them in the insane asylum. Pat O'Connor and Judy McCrea made up their minds that they would remain quietly at home and attend to their business, and would positively not have any intercourse with Dr. Juno, but if the general would return, they would confide the matter to him. The general was still in Liverpool at this time, and as soon as Victor Juno had escaped, the bloody conspirators managed to write to him at once, and gave him the sore information that Dr. Juno had returned home, evidently having deserted his daughter, Miss Lucinda Armington. That unless they gave the general the first information of it, and someone else would do so, he might suspicion his faithful brethren and lose faith in their integrity. They told the general in their letter that they learned that Miss Lucinda was then in London, the mother of a little son, and that he had better direct his steps there, for she was evidently in poverty and great distress. The poor general went almost mad when he received the news, and concluded that he would go to London and diligently search for his misled child, and if he failed to find her in a certain period, he would sail for his home in America, for he felt as though his beloved daughter was near her own home. At any rate, he was nearly insane, and he would return to revenge himself on Victor Juno, and he would seek him, and with a loaded revolver pointed at Dr. Juno's breast, he would make him confess or shoot him dead. Whenever General Washington Armington made up his mind to do anything, he would never cease thinking of it until he had fulfilled his mental promises. He therefore went to London in company with his expert detective, but after a fortnight's diligent search, they gave it up as a failure. The detective told the general that he felt certain that neither his daughter nor Dr. Juno had been in Europe, as reported, but that he believed, and he claimed his judgment to be good, that his daughter was hid away not far from the general's own home. This coincided exactly with the general's own views. The latter therefore started for America, and arrived at his residence in a very brief season, where the faithful servants were found when he arrived. Pat O'Connor intended to confide what he knew at once to his master, but the general was in such an agitated state of mind that he would not give Pat an opportunity to say anything to him. The only thing he asked Pat was, "Is Victor Juno at his home?" "Yes," said Pat. "My God," retorted the general, and asked Pat to leave him. He now prepared a six-shooter, and at once set out to seek Dr. Victor Juno. He found the doctor in his medical office, where he accosted him thus: "Now, you infernal rascal, where is my daughter?" "That is just what I want to know," anxiously but coolly. This so enraged the general that he presented his revolver to Dr. Juno's breast and fired. End of chapter 24. Recording by John Brandon.
Chapter 25 of the Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meg Turasek. The Social War of 1900, or The Conspirators and Lovers, by Simon Landis. Chapter 25. Dr. Juno locked out of concert hall, which caused a riot. Dr. Victor Juno, after running the night watchman into his cell and bolting the door, had very little trouble in making his way out of the asylum. He unbolted the iron stair door, and after he passed through it, locked it again and pocketed the key, thinking that he might need it elsewhere. Since he now had the keeper or watchman stored away where he could not be heard should he scream with all his might, he felt almost certain that no one else was in that part of the institution, but, for fear there might be, he was cautious in his advancement, and although he put the keeper's hat on, he was too large to look like him. As he arrived on the first floor, where lights shone dimly, he beheld a man in the distant part of the corridor, who called to Dr. Juno. "Jeremiah, will you take charge of this ward for the balance of the night?" When Dr. Juno replied, "Certainly I will," the man instantly passed through a door and disappeared. He evidently mistook Dr. Juno for the legitimate watchman. The doctor now followed the advice which Jemmy gave him, and with a slight effort pried the only door open that was locked, until he reached the open yard of the asylum, and with his rope, chisel, and hammer, he readily scaled the wall, and in an hour he was in his office. Having been away for several weeks, he must at once begin his lectures again, and when he retired to his bed, could not sleep for thinking what he had better to do. He soliloquized as follows: "When I last preached in the Walnut Street Theatre, the Pharisees colluded together to create a riot, and failing in that, they influenced the mayor to solicit the proprietor of the theatre to not let me have it again, as a monstrous breach of the peace was threatened. Then, when I returned to my own small hall in the northern part of the city, and had immense crowds of people follow me who could not gain admission on account of my room being too small, the Pharisees were displeased with even that success, when they literally bought off all the daily newspaper proprietors, requesting them to cease taking a single advertisement from me, and even refused to insert my name for love or money into their columns. They thought, of course, that, if I was deprived of the use of the theatres, large public halls, and the newspaper advertising columns, I would be compelled to starve or leave the city, and now as I have been abducted and confined in that hellhole of an insane asylum, these bloody conspirators will make a handle of it, or at least in some way construe my absence into something that will speak against me. I have my own newspaper, the Sharpshooter and Antifoggy, which they dread awfully, and I have my own hall, that will seat 300 people. But my hall is not large nor fashionable enough for the elite to enter it. At any rate, a small audience cannot be fired up and made enthusiastic like a large one. Hence I will hunt around tomorrow and see if I cannot find some large public hall or theatre that has not been bought off by the Pharisees. I shall go to see my darling Lucinda the first thing in the morning. She will be delighted to see me. The poor girl, I wonder if she dreams of the persecution that I have suffered. I'll ask the General to advise and aid me to get a large hall to preach in next Sunday evening." In the morning, Dr. Juno's servant told him what the report was about him whilst he was gone, that most of the people, who had been his former friends, really believed that he had eloped with Miss Lucinda Armington. "What?" ejaculated the astonished doctor. "Eloped with Miss Lucinda Armington? Great heavens! Has she been also away in my absence?" "Certainly. She disappeared the same night that you did, and has not been heard of since," said his servant. "This is monstrous! Oh, God, this is truly unendurable! Jack, leave me to meditate over this outrage," exclaimed Dr. Juno in agony. "I am confounded, and scarcely know what course to pursue, but I cannot lose time in thinking. I'll go and see the General, and tell him all about my incarceration. But these confounded conspirators assuredly have turned him against me. Truly, I see it all. They have abducted dear Lucinda the very night that I was kidnapped, and very likely she is confined in the same lunatic asylum from which I escaped. What can I do to find her? I dare not be rash or imprudent in the matter, because these bloody monsters have everything their own way just now. Therefore I must work cautiously, but energetically." Dr. Juno looked around for a large centrally located public hall to preach in. He first went to Concert Hall, which was the largest and most fashionable place in the city, knowing that a new proprietor had it for rent, and verily he agreed to lease it to Dr. Juno for a year to preach in on Sunday evenings. Therefore he at once had his posters and circulars printed and distributed, and also sent his advertisement to the only independent newspapers, the Sunday papers, to which he always had access in common with the community at large. The moment it was noticed by the religious bigots that Dr. Juno was advertising to speak in Concert Hall on the following Sunday, they went to the new and inexperienced proprietor of the hall, and told him to prevent Victor Juno from preaching in his hall, or they would withdraw their patronage and operate against him, which would have literally ruined the proprietor. The latter therefore went to the mayor, and said to him, "Your Honor, I have leased Concert Hall to Dr. Juno for the purpose of preaching by himself, and the Young Men's Association, opposite, say that if I let him speak only one night in the place, that they will throw up their engagements for the winter and do all against me that is in their power, and this would surely ruin me, for the influence of the religious community is the power in our city. Now, sir, I have come to ask you what I had better do tomorrow." "Do? Close the doors against him, of course. But you have time to inform him today that he cannot have it," said His Honor the pious, or make-believe saint, Mayor M. "My dear sir, I have already informed Dr. Juno that he cannot have it, but he insists on having it, as he has paid for it, and has also freely advertised the same, which undoubtedly will bring a crowd tomorrow, Sunday evening," exclaimed the proprietor of the hall. "Ah, indeed, he defies you, does he? Very well, we will see. You bolt the doors as strongly as you can, and I will have a posse of police there to guard and protect you thoroughly," responded the excellent mayor. "Many thanks, noble sir. I shall follow your advice strictly," said the proprietor. When Sunday evening arrived, it rained heavily. Being a settled rain, but notwithstanding this rain, and then no streetcars running on the Sabbath day, there was an immense crowd of people congregated in front of the hall. But the doors were closed, and a large force of policemen lining the entrance to the same. The people wanted to know what this all meant. The answer came from one of the police officers, that Juno was prohibited from preaching therein on this occasion. And as soon as this got noised throughout the 4,000 to 5,000 people that were patiently waiting to see the doors open, they became impatient and rebellious, and cried aloud, "Dr. Juno! Dr. Juno!" He got on a step and said in a loud voice, "The Pharisees are determined that you shall not be allowed to hear me preach to you. I have paid for the hall in advance, and you see the rest yourselves." Then an immense uproar burst upon the air. "Mob the police! Mob the police!" And a most terrible riot ensued. End of chapter 25. Recording by Meg Turasek.